welcome to Where's My Sports At? On today's podcast, Jimmy and I are joined by Keith Roberts. Keith is a personal trainer. He has been a strength and conditioning coach for national and provincial rugby teams, as well as a former international track and field coach. Keith, we really appreciate you coming along today. Thank you very much. It's an honour to have you.
It's my pleasure. I'm delighted to be here.
Cheers, Keith. So I'm going to start us off with our questions to start with. Mm-hmm. Firstly, tell us about you. What got you motivated to get into training and to become an athletics coach and sports scientist?
Looking back, I found a photograph of me as a 12-year-old as a coxswain in London. I grew up in London, and I was invited to go and be a coxswain for a novice 4-man crew. And I did that for 4 years until I sort of got too big, and I was a late developer. I'm a small person anyway, but late developer. So I did that for 4 years, and I guess I learned a lot about driving people and ultimate, pushing the body to limits and so on, and tactical awareness, mental toughness, all those sort of things. And then I decided at my school in London that I wanted to study physical education. I was inspired by one of my teachers, and so I went to a very famous place in England called Loughborough College, and I started my first year there, finished my first year. In my second year, halfway through the first term, I left to come to New Zealand because I met this Kiwi girl who's now my wife 55 years ago, nearly. And 55 years ago, I met her 55 years ago. And then, so I came to Otago University and studied physical education there. And I had done a lot of sports myself, representative at rugby and particularly athletics in England. And then from Otago University, I went to teaching and then began coaching. And so my physical education teaching, my coaching kind of set me up. And it was athletics I was more interested in coaching. And I started at my first school, actually at Rutherford High School. I coached the first 11 soccer team because I was from a football background, you know what I mean? I was a London boy, played up football. I never knew rugby till I went to secondary school. But we had to play rugby because it was a grammar school. And so I ended up coaching the first 11. But then I also was training the first 15 because they had a pretty rubbish coach and he didn't do much with the boys and the team weren't performing. Whereas the first 11 were outstanding. And so since then, I've done a lot in my teaching career. I haven't really coached teams. I've coached athletics, coached cross country, but I've done conditioning work for volleyball and rugby teams and other school hockey teams and that sort of thing. And then from there, I moved into more serious athletic coaching, did courses and went on international programs and so on for the International Athletic Federation. And then in 1985, I was appointed as National Director of Coaching for Athletics New Zealand for 2 years. And I began my international career with New Zealand's secondary schools team, my first team I took away overseas to Brisbane. And from then I worked until the early 90s. But I still kept my involvement. In the 90s, I sort of began to get involved through my athletics into rugby. And rugby started offering me positions, and I was invited to help Bay of Plenty Rugby. And then I was still living in Northlands at the time. And then I helped with Gordon Titchens with Bay of Plenty Sevens. They won the Melrose Sevens first time. And so then Titch and I have had this association, which he actually set me up for the Hurricanes, and then in 2001 he set me up for Bay of Plenty. So then Bay of Plenty Rugby was my first full-time rugby position, and so since 2001 that sort of steered me almost 100% towards rugby. But I had opportunities to go to the Olympics in Rio in 2016 with the Cook Islands. So I'd been in the Cook Islands and I'd coached one of their athletes and he qualified for the Olympics. So, I've had a really quite a fascinating career. I've had various roles in track and field as a coach, as a mentor, as a sports chaplain at Olympic Games, Commonwealth Games as well. And so, I've seen both sides of the fence, as it were, from an athlete's viewpoint, from a management viewpoint. And I guess I've applied my physical education knowledge into all things. And I looked at my resume the other day in New Zealand with 18 different codes at international level.
Oh,
different things, different. I mean, from Tai Chi to judo, from athletics right down to volleyball, equestrian, cricket, rowing. Basically, you name it, I've done it with squash and so on. So just looking at athletes, looking at their movement, and then working out programs for them. So I don't coach all those things, but I do, conditioning activities for these particular events.
that's amazing.
Hmm.
And over the years, Keith, like how have you found the people's body shapes have changed over the many years, and how have you found the different techniques with the differing years and different bringing in new methods to athletes? How have you found the transition with those?
It's been quite interesting actually, because I can remember back in the late 90s, mid 90s, 1995, Gordon Titchen's. I'd started with the sevens in 1994, so progress from Bay of Plenty sevens into New Zealand sevens when Titch got appointed. And then after 2 seasons, he said, "Oh, Keith, the game's becoming more physical. We need to do more strength work." And so we were the first. We set the standard for everything, basically, in sevens internationally. And so with my athletics background, and I knew that I'd played sevens, I knew the physiology, the physiological demands of sevens. And so I just brought in strength training and conditioning work to help. And for years we were untouchable. In those early days, we won everything that was going. And then when they started the international series, I think we won the first 6 years on the trot, and including world champs and so on. So there have been a lot of changes. There's been a lot of toys and developments and changes, and this is better than that and so on. But I say it's not an exact science, but there's a lot of things that people do that have value. And I use this mantra that it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. That's what gets results. And there's an old song, and I won't sing it now, but it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. That's what gets results. You know that way? And it's true. So there's nothing wrong with doing a particular exercise, but what's it for? What's its purpose? And people can come and look at my training session and say, well, there's nothing special about that. But what did they do the day before? What do they do the day after? What are they peaking for? How many days of rest have they had? And so on and so on. So, you've got to look at the whole picture. And I guess for me, also, I learned through athletics about periodization, or planning a whole program for a season or for an Olympiad, in fact, for an Olympic cycle of 4 years. And so, you're developing an athlete's body. As you said, body shape is changing, methods of training is changing. And so more equipment's available. So now, we have GPS, for example, that most teams wear, basketball, netball, and so on, rugby and soccer wear them. Whereas before, we used to do like a time on task analysis, just watching with the clock and stop, start, and make a list of how much a person was walking. And
So you do that during a game or a training session. You'd sit there and take notes of a time and motion study.
Yeah.
Oh my word! That would have. How many hours did you have left in the day?
Oh, it's a long time. But if I can tell you an interesting story, it was a Tongan international rugby player, played for Northland, and he was the fastest guy in the country. And so we watched him one day. Northland were playing King Country, and I had my students doing this because I was on the sideline with Northland. So I had the students teed up, and he scored 4 tries in the game. So his total maximum speed was something like 7 seconds in the game. Right. So because he got the ball, bang, and he scored maybe 11. It was 11 seconds here, because he's longer. He did 160 meters, and the rest were about 30 meters out. So that's about 11 seconds total. So then he jogged for something like 3.5 minutes, and then he walked for do the maths. 60 anyway, it was 74 minutes or whatever. He walked. But that was him. But then he was an international, and he was a top try scorer, and so on. Yeah.
Wow.
So
That's amazing.
So these days, they do so much analysis and stats on TV, and so they say, well, the ball's only in play for 50% of a game, sometimes even less. Yeah. And then you've got the set piece stuff, and you've got it goes on and on and on. So how much actual time is an athlete running? What distances are they covering? And I remember in football, soccer in England, they came up with a study in the 70s, and they measured how far these players were running. Now it comes up on the screen nowadays, and it was about 10K for a soccer player. But the amazing thing was a goalkeeper was running about 3K in a game. Well, now it's more because the goalie's game is opened up because the goalie can run, travel with the ball, and so on. It's more like 5 or 6K for a goalkeeper now. So knowing that sort of thing, you think, okay, goalies don't need any cardio. Well, they do, and they need repeated speed. So because of analysis work, you say, well, what are the needs? That athlete is doing this amount of work at that amount of speed, so therefore he needs to train or she needs to train, accordingly. So
Wow.
you suit the training methods, the training workout to suit the needs of the game specifically for that one position.
Wow, that's 18 different sports, though. I'm thinking, what must that be like trying to train athletes for strength and conditioning? Because there's so many different movements. There's obviously similarities in some ways across sports, but there's so you compare rugby to athletics, and there's other than the fact that you're running, there's no similarities. You must have to like learn on the fly constantly what and how to train these individuals.
Yes, but I've always asked a lot for the athletes, and particularly like the higher level you go, the more the athletes know about themselves and about the demands. But then I watch, and for example, I watched. I worked with Brian Young, the opening bat for New Zealand cricket years ago, and he'd done something like 7 years non-stop cricket. Summer, winter, UK, Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere, and his knees were packing up, and I said, well, what's causing it? Well, it's when I'm all the turning. And, at that stage, I think he had the record for number of runs as an opening batsman in New Zealand. And so I just watched him turning. And I just noticed the way that he planted his feet. Well, that's what the problem. He's putting pressure on his knee joint because he's planting his feet horizontally and not turning his feet. So I just showed him a simple mechanical change to turn his feet and his hips around to face the opposite way, and it saved his career.
Wow.
The other thing was this: if you're thinking in cricket, when you lunge, the cricketers are lunging and they're side on, right? So they've only got vision on one side of the field. So if the ball is behind, they've got no idea what's happening unless they're going to rely on their mate. But if you turn around, get your feet, and you look upfield, you can see both sides of the field. So therefore, you've got a much greater chance of avoiding being run out if the ball's on the other side of the field. So you've got no blind spot. Yeah. And that vision, so it was the first thing was a mechanical thing about saving his knee. The second thing was a technical thing, which affected his efficiency. Oh, like, we can go now. Yeah, the ball's over there. I know I can go, and I can see my opponent. I see my teammate rather, and he's giving me cues. He doesn't have to speak. He just give me a nod, yeah, go or whatever. So those sort of things you learn from the athletes. And then Brian was phenomenal about attention to detail. He's the most what's the word? Almost anal, I would say, about preparation and everything. It was fantastic to work with. Taught me an awful lot, which I was able to apply to many other sports as well, in terms of that attention to detail. And so those are the differences that I remember going back to University of Otago in 1981. I was on staff for a year, and I was invited to do all different programs and so on. I was on a teaching fellowship. And I was asked to go and do some work in the biomechanics area, and they're all in this room. When I was at university, we didn't have that sort of technology, so it was like going to a NASA space station. They had all these gizmos and so on. But I just watched somebody moving, and I said, "Well, that's because." So I was able to describe the motion and the faults, and the students would say, "How do you know that?" Because all they could look at it was digitized figures and slow motion figures. I said, "Well, I've seen it 1,000 times, and I know I can predict movement patterns now in certain activities. So I know when you're going to throw, run, jump, or whatever, there's a predictable movement pattern. And so if you're going to be long and slow, if your arms are, if you're going to jump and your arms are fully extended, it's slower than if you do a short, fast movement. So there's all sorts of little things about jumping in a line out. And I trained Ian Jones before they had lifting when he was in Northland. And I improved his vertical jump by 10 centimeters over 2 seasons. That's quite significant.
Yeah, that's
in days without lifting.
Yeah.
And he could out jump anybody in the country, even Mark Crooksley, who was the tallest lock, 7 foot, whatever he was, or bigger.
I remember Big Cookie.
Yeah. And so, internationally, Jonesy was the best jumper because he was quick off the ground. And ironically, I trained him together with a guy, his name was Dale de Gersoff. He was a Canadian basketball player who played in Northland for the Northern Suns, and they used to train together. Now, Dale was very, very good off the ground. He was big shoulders, and he was also very good in the air. Now Ian was good in the air, but he wasn't that great quick off the ground. Great athlete. I mean, great because he came from swimming, so he had great, lung capacity and so on. Great physiology, and he was the fittest forward in the All Blacks for all the time he was there. So those two complemented each other, and he would learn. He'd do basketball drills and jump with Dale. It was improved his hand-eye coordination. And back in those days, they went to the old single. You had to use your inside arm for jumping.
Yeah.
All that dumb rule, and you couldn't. So he was very ambidextrous because of his work he did with the basketball guy. So he was easy with that, as opposed to a lot of guys would come across and, wrong, you get penalised, and it's a dumb rule, but it was to try and stop the people crossing over the line. So again, I used the athletes working together to work out a system to help Ian and also Dale, because Dale's quickness off the ground improved because of his jumping work he did with Ian. So the two complemented each other.
That's incredible. and I understand you have a story for us about the Hurricanes back in the day. You're telling one about the lifting with the boys with the weights.
Oh yeah. So they were just front on men, they beach muscle men. They just wanted to do guns and chest, and they had no idea about whole body strength or whatever. And actually, when I went my first day when I met with the Hurricanes, a few of them knew me through sevens, and there was no Northern boys at that stage, but so I'd met a few of them, and I was introduced to them, and I spoke to them about my philosophy, and they were like, "Where's this guy from?" This is back in '96, and we had second and third division. We had guys from Whanganui and Hawke's Bay and second, and they're like, "What's he talking about?" And so I said, my attitude of you're athletes. They said, no, we're rugby players, mate. We're rugby players. No, you're athletes who play rugby. They're like, what? And so that was my attitude. And so in the first year, we did a whole lot of different things that even in South Africa, they were filming us, and like, wow, we've never seen this sort of work, flexibility work. And in fact, I was invited to work with Laurie Mains when Laurie first took over the Junior Blacks in, I think, '94. I was down at Sevens with Titch, and he said, "Oh, Keith, there's the New Zealand All Black coaches want to meet with you." So it was him, Earl Curtin, and Ross Cooper, and they were taking a team of Baby Blacks to Argentina. So I had a meeting with them, and they said, "What do you think's wrong with New Zealand rugby with the players?" I said, "Well, how long a list do you want?" They said, "Well, give it to us." So I told them, and they said, "Well, hey, why don't you come and," because Titch had been singing my praises, you see, about what we do with the sevens and so on. And so they invited me to a camp, and I went to this camp and like, whoa, flexibility work, pool training, speed training, warming up, cooling down, and applied skills and all that sort of teaching about stepping. And so I applied I know the games. So I played a lot of things myself. I played water polo and when I was at Otago, and a whole lot of different things I've experienced myself. And I try a lot of things as well. So I've never competed in judo, but I've gone and watched my judo player. I've watched her training. I've watched her in competition, and then we go to the gym and we apply what she needs through, groundwork, flexibility with some resistance as well. So it's kind of an ongoing learning process. But going back to the Hurricanes, I'd go to the gym, and the boys, what they were doing is bench and guns, and I'd come in and oh no, we're just practicing with we better do our back strength. And so the boys, I mean, they were much, much stronger than I was in terms of they could push a lot, but they couldn't pull as much as I could. And they couldn't do dumbbell. Their backs were really, really weak. And yet their chest and it was really, really... And I used to compete with these guys and, with doing dips, I could out-dip them. And one day I was with Tana Umanga and Alama Edemia. Excuse me, boys, for saying this, but I smashed them in the dips. And they thought they were bigger and better than me. And we kept on going. We do another set. And in the end, they gave up because I just wouldn't quit. Doing set after set, 1, 2, 3, and they... We'll leave it. So, I bring a bit of competition from my own experience and background, and still I do stuff in the gym now that people look at me, what? Because I used to do gymnastics and pole vaulting, and that was I'm good at aerial things, a good core. I can get my feet up in the air and on a rope and so on. So handstands and that sort of thing, just people. But going back to the Hurricanes, at the end of the first year, we did so. I mean, we were the bottom ranked team. I think we finished 9th out of 12. And I said to the boys, people people in the media said, well, how good are these guys going to be? I said, I don't know. They're untapped, these boys. They were just learning. But the boys understood now about my philosophy, and they began to see changes. So the next year, so at the end of the year, I'm in the hotel, we're walking down the hall, and there's, what's his name? Carl from Manawatu, number 8 from Manawatu.
Oh,
Carl. Anyway, he's walking down the hallway, and he's got a towel around. He's come out of the shower, and he's got a big back on him. And I said, Carl, bro, look at this. I said, you cast a big shadow, bro. He turned and looked at me and said, you've created a monster. And the boys, they all started to see the changes. And then one day, I remember, I think it was the second year or third year, I called the forwards over. I said, you Popos, come over here. He'd be up north, and Popos, Bull Allen looked at me and he said, no, we're athletes. We're athletes, mate. So they got the mindset change, you see. We're athletes. And they became athletes. And so at the end of the beginning of the second year, I said, well, last year's workouts will be this year's warm-ups. And that's how it was. And at the end of the beginning of the third year, I said ditto for last year. And it happened every year the same. And we progressively went higher and higher and harder and faster and so on. And our stats improved every year. So, yeah.
So other teams must be doing the same sort of philosophies as well, because everyone would have been new to professionalism in 95, 96, and they all would have been experiencing the same thing. So did you have a conversation with strength and conditioning coaches from other teams? Were they experiencing the same things?
Yes, we every year we used to have a gathering. And first of all, it was the just the 5 franchises together with the All Blacks. At the time, it was Martin Toomey, so he was the All Blacks and the Highlanders. And then it extended to Provincial strength and conditioning. But no, see, at those days, there was no full-time S&C guys. They were all part-timers and coming in and out. The first one was a guy by the name of from Taranaki, Gill.
Nick Gill?
Nick Gill. No.
Nick Gill's in Papamoa, isn't he?
He was an athletics coach, and he was appointed by Taranaki. And he was a bit like me when I went to Northland and Bad Plenty. I was there, and the coaches changed, but I was a constant factor. My 7 years with Northland and 5 years or 6 years with the Bay. The coaches were moved, but I'm still there. And so we would have these meetings and we discuss what was relevant and what testing protocols, particularly for Super Rugby. So the good thing about New Zealand Rugby is that it progresses from schools to academies to provincial teams to super teams to All Blacks. And so the pyramid is everyone's aiming for the same way, or everyone's paddling the same way, same waka. So overseas in Japan, I've worked, and other, they're still independent. England's independent. It's your club, and France is your club, and so there's no cohesion until recently. But going back to those early days, I suppose a lot of the trainers even didn't have my background in athletics, and they were new. And I can remember going back in my last year, I was called to a meeting, and there was all these 3 young grads. They were the Hurricanes, with Highlanders and the Crusaders. And they're all fresh out of varsity, and they're quoting all this theory and all this da da da. And I said, well, and this particular man, there's a man who wrote a book about periodization, and his name was Tudor Bompa, Bompa. He was a Russian living in America, and he wrote this big, thick Bible on periodization. So they're quoting Bompa this and Bompa that and Bompa this. And I said, well, boys, does Bompa ever work with rugby players, with rugby? Oh, no. I said, well, the reality is his program don't fit rugby. So the theory is good, but the practice that doesn't work. So you've got to apply your theory, and I guess that's a gift that maybe an edge that I had, because I had my athletic background. I knew about periodization. I was able to adapt programs and peak athletes at the right time. And so I mentioned before about South Africa. Now I remember they'd come out of the apartheid era in '94. And so Super Rugby in '96, it was like an explosion for them, and they were so far behind. And they come and watch us training, and they're, whoa, they've never seen that sort of training. They was just hard yards, doing whatever they used to do, and they were just pretty average. The only reason why they succeeded in their first year was they had home referees in South Africa, and they cheated on us. Honestly.
I thought we said nothing controversial.
Well, they did.
Yeah,
But
don't do.
But the funny thing was, the proof of the pudding was the next year when they had neutral refs, New Zealand teams started winning. So in the first year looking Super Rugby, no New Zealand teams won in South Africa, not one. But the
I'll have to
next
go
year,
back and check that.
next year we won both our games in South Africa with neutral refs, Aussie refs. And so, in fact, I ended up training the referees when we were on tour as well.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
first aren't they, the
Yeah.
refs?
Hey, I've got a question. Are there any, because you talked about swimming and Ian Jones, and I know a few rugby players have had swimming backgrounds, and it definitely does help with the aerobic fitness. Over your
Yes.
years of coaching rugby players, are there any players that stick out to you as having really big engines? You know, just
Yeah.
in their capacity.
Another one is another swimmer, Tanner Latimer, played with Chiefs, New Zealand Māori and All Blacks. That was a swimmer.
Guess whose
Yes.
cousin he is.
Yeah, okay, that's
I,
so.
I remember his mother taking him to the pools in Greaton at 5 o'clock
Yeah,
in the morning to train.
that's right. Yeah, so he had great discipline. He'd go to school and fall asleep, and but he's terrific. Liam Messham's another one, and there's numbers of guys in I mean, Eric Rush and down to Seymour. Those guys were phenomenal. Caleb Ralph, another one in the sevens. And Caleb was a bit of a freak. He's a New Zealand 800-meter schools champion, and so he had a good, a tremendous oxygen uptake. But a lot of those sevens boys, they had an amazing ability to work under fatigue for long periods of time, and that was because I knew the sport, I understood the sport, and I knew the conditions and how much you could do. And then he added Titch's mean streak on top of that, so it created a very successful winning formula. But there have been other rugby players who've been outstanding in different roles. Obviously, John Olomu and Christian Cullen, and Roger Randall's another one. Bull Allen, and there's others I've worked. There's the Hurricanes guys I think of straight away. But a lot of these players have developed. For example, Norm Hewitt, Philo Tiers here, Andrew Blowers, when they were with me in the Hurricanes, they were not picked for the All Blacks because of their 3K time trial. So we trained for 3K. That's easy for me as an athletics coach. Train, and then they passed the standard and then got picked.
I always wondered why Andrew Blowers never made it. Is one of those guys that, you thought he was good enough, more than good enough.
Yeah. Well, in fact, he would be, if you ask me, like I would say, my two athletes, the most polished professional. Brian Young was the one I mentioned him before, and Andrew Blowers would be the other. He was a consummate professional to the detail, like just driving me nuts sometimes. Like, Keith, can we go a stretch? It was just brilliant to work with. I mean, he was just way ahead of his time. And I had a lovely compliment a couple of years ago. We had a Hurricanes reunion. I think it was the 21st or 21st year reunion. And some of the originals were there. And Bull Allen was the captain. He was there. And he said, Keith, and it sort of goes back to answering one of your questions, Craig, that he said, we realise now you were not just ahead of your time. He said, you're probably 20 years ahead of your time, not just 10 years. He said, we're doing stuff now that you were doing back then. We didn't know about it. So, I used to do flexibility work, and I said, why do we have to do all this flexibility work? We had no soft tissue injuries in the first year at all. We had impact injuries, collision injuries, but no tears, no strains at all in the whole season.
Yeah.
Now, the second year, we backed off a little bit, and we started getting a niggle here and a niggle there, and so then we had to go back to being, this is why. So, you got big, strong quads, but your hamstrings are weak. We had, so one year, then we ended up with 4 guys with hamstrings because we weren't doing sufficient. Whereas the first year was strengthening and flexibility work with the hamstrings. Simple for me, but for them, it's all about quads, about big thighs, and how much you can squat. But what about, because again, in athletics, you've got to have a balance, and you don't often hear people tearing their quads, occasionally, but how often you hear people got hammies?
Yeah.
Because there's an imbalance, and they don't address that.
We saw that at the sevens. There was a few who pulled up with hammy injuries.
Yeah. And a few of our boys too.
Yeah.
Of memory. Yeah.
And, I remember one, I won't say who it is because it might embarrass him. He's a very high profile now, S&C player, man in New Zealand. when he was working with another franchise I won't mention, but close to my heart, we had some of our boys from Bay of Plenty playing for that franchise, so you can work out who I may be talking about. And they had done a particular workout. This is going back some years now, 20 years. And they'd done this particular workout on one day, and then the next day we did another workout, and 4 of those boys came with hamstring injuries. Well, what a surprise to me, because you don't repeated what they were doing the day after the day before, high intensity workout. And
Wow.
they suffered from that, and then I talked to the trainer about that at that time. It was fresh, new, and okay, yeah, I realised you shouldn't have done that. Yeah, well, it's didn't have to have a PhD to work that out, but some people think you do. And that guy now, he has a PhD now. And he's been in the game for a long time, and he's world class, world famous. But again, when he was working with Waikato. We used to beat them up by plenty because they weren't strong enough. And we had players from Waikato come into New Zealand Sevens, and they weren't strong enough. They weren't conditioned as well as our other boys were. And they would say, well, what's going on? I said, well, you've got to lift some serious tin. But you've got to do it not just beach muscles, you've got to be explosive Olympic type lifting, because I come from speed power background in athletics.
Yeah.
So I'm saying I'm a speed freak, but that applies. I mean, I say speed beats everything.
Yeah.
Really.
Interesting. Now, you sort of talked about speed and power. Here's a question for you. There's a lot of contention around CrossFit. As a strength and conditioning coach yourself, how do you feel about it? People say there's a lot of injuries come through CrossFit because of its repetitive type activities. What are your thoughts?
There are a lot of injuries from it. It's primarily due to bad technique and the repetitive nature. So people aren't coached, they're not trained, they just go and do. And I've seen people, you do what? And you look at their body, they're not even built for doing CrossFit. They go to class and they want to compete, and if they're a bloke, they want to lift the biggest mountain. I said, what are you doing that for? Oh, no, you need to know to lift properly. So my philosophy in lifting is, it's not how much you lift, it's how well you lift. So it's technique above all else. And then you can apply. And so even last night, I'm taking a local team, my whatever men's team. I said, we're doing a particular lift. It's not a race. It's not a bang, how many you can do in so many seconds. If you need to pause and recheck your form, that's what I'm important, because what you do in the gym should enhance what you do on the field, not be detrimental. And so often you get people, rugby player, I'm doing CrossFit, and they get injured. Why? Because they got bad technique, and it's, as you said, too much repetition, and body can't cope with that. And ironically, rugby is probably one of the hardest sports to condition for. And I remember going back to this early days when Peter Thorburn was coaching sevens before Titch, and they had a meeting of the minds, as it were, in Auckland. And they invited, I think it was 5 of us, myself and Marty Toomey was from Dunedin. He became the All Black trainer. And we had a physio, Thorbs, and a couple of other people to talk about what's the main requirement for rugby. And we spoke all day. We had and we never came to a consensus. And I said, coaching athletics is easy. So if you're a sprinter, there's a lot of components to sprinting, but no one's going to tackle you. You're running in a straight line most of the time, where you have to maybe learn to run a curve. You run 200s, but in rugby you have to run, you have to tackle, you have to pass, you have to all these skills. There's no predictable movement pattern at all, really, apart from set piece. But then you got people jumping against you or pushing against you, and when you're in a rowing boat, it's a very closed skill. So it's a repetitive skill. There's a lot of technique to it, but again, you've got to cope with water conditions and wind and that sort of thing. But all you do is slide up and down and pull your oar. And there was a famous athletics coach, bless his soul, Sam Johnson. He was a throws coach. And he used to say, running's easy. He said, just go left, right, turn at the corner. And that's all there was to do for middle distance running, Whereas, if you're a discus thrower, there's a lot of components to discus throwing, but you can control that. Yeah, there's a repetitive nature, but in rugby, you've got to have speed and strength and stamina, endurance and
Wrestling,
psychology. Yeah, body
Boxing.
contact. Yeah, so there's innumerable ways of, what is the most important thing? Well, I still say speed beats everything, but again, strength increases your ability. So resistance work is important, but how much? So going back to the early days in Super Rugby, I remember the Auckland franchise in those days. the boys decided they wanted to the gym work was the thing, but they started doing bodybuilding and they started getting injured. So Carlos Spencer, Adrian Cashmore, two in point, beautiful bodies, but they couldn't play because they were injured, because their muscles weren't conditioned for the rigors of rugby. They were if you're a bodybuilder, it's static, just pump, and make a pose. But rugby's not like that. And so I've seen and heard of rugby players who've done mass bulking up, and they tear muscles off the bone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You hear that a lot about league players
Yeah.
these days with pectoral muscles injuries, and that comes down to that,
Yeah.
doesn't it? Just lifting, but not being conditioned to be an endurance athlete.
Exactly.
That's almost what they have to be, isn't it?
So, my throwaway here is my conditioning is all about lengthening and strengthening muscles, or making your muscles longer and stronger.
Yeah.
So Bull Allen's in point. Bull was the year before he was Hurricanes captain. Bill, you need to get bigger in the chest. So he builds up his chest and he goes and plays over the summer period. He goes to play rugby, make a tackle, move, push past him, and he ripped his pec off. So then the muscle rolls up in the ball over across the shoulder here. So Bull's got a scar down here that they open up, unravel, and staple the muscle to his chest. And that
That's horrific.
cost him assistant. And it's not the only one. There's been others who've done the same thing as you said in the league, and because or another classic example when I was with Northland back in the early '90s, he was a small number 8. He was, you need to build up your chest, bro. He was. So he went away and did his beach muscles. Now this is before lifting. Now he was so muscle bound, so he couldn't extend his arms because his chest was too tight. So he jumped, but his effective jumping height was about this much less. So it was even more of a waste of time, and he didn't get picked. But he looked great.
Yeah.
But he didn't reach his goal of playing for Northland because he didn't know about increasing range of motion.
Yeah. Well, look, it got Carlos a Toffee Pops ad, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Back in the day. Hey, are there any players that you've worked with over the years that you're particularly proud of what they achieved? They must be like almost like your kids from school. You're doing the same philosophy basically with children at school and with athletes. Are there any that sort of stick in the back of your mind that you're like, I'm really proud of maybe how they trained, what they achieved? They might not have made the highest level, but just you'll always remember them.
Well, I guess one of the most famous would be Jonah Lomu. Because Jonah wasn't wanted. He was rejected by the All Blacks in that 1995 campaign. He was dropped out because he wasn't fit enough. But he came to sevens, and through sevens and through working with us, he just got better and better and better. And so, it was, I love the guy to death. He was a physical freak of a specimen and the loveliest guy, personality and so on. But, in sevens, I was telling these young boys at the boys' high school the other day, they said, I can't do any more. So, and they said that, I said, Jonah always finished. He finished everything. He wasn't always the first, or he was always, at the beginning phase, he was always last, but he always finished. So that's a big achievement. They overcome all the adversity. Plus, we didn't know about the kidney issue, as a young man, what was going on. But, when a guy like his size can run a level 13 and a half beat test when he started at level 10 or level 9, and so, so he would be one of the famous guys. And I remember the day he was called in to the final trial in Whangarei, because Eric Rush was injured. Eric Rush pulled his hamstring, thought he was out of the All Blacks, and Jonah scored 4 tries in Whangarei that night, and that was the rest of his history. So that was a launching pad for him. So the groundwork with him, when I first heard of him, Titch called me up and said, Sir Gordon Titchens rang up and said, I've got this amazing guy, but he needs to get fitter. Can you give him a program? So I never met Jonah. I'd seen him play. I never met him. And I gave 6 weeks out from Nationals, and he got player of the tournament at Nationals. And then he got picked to New Zealand, and then he went to Hong Kong, and the rest, All Blacks history. So that would be one of my, famous person. Sorry, but it's not. But there've been so many others. A lot of them are unknowns in the sporting world, but really from my physical education and students who were opposed to any, I don't want to swim, I don't like this, I don't. Now they swim, there's children swim, they do tennis or whatever. So those are the kind of rewards you get from teaching as a teacher, but also in coaching. There's an old saying that often people succeed because other people fall away.
Yeah.
So we all know people from just say intermediate school who are outstanding athletes, potential boys and girls. They get to 14, 15 and it's too hard. But other people persevere and they push on through and they become national title holders and so on in their chosen sport. But I think if any more come to mind, or one outstanding one, I'll come back to it.
And that leads to the next question there, because I've got a little 12-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
How old should these athletes be starting to do all the like stretching and flexibility always can be done, but like weight work and endurance work, all that sort of stuff, when should they be starting to work on that?
When their bodies begin to mature. So you can do body weight work, resistance work using body weight, chins and dips and that sort of thing, press ups and maybe light dumbbells, etc. But if I'm always mindful. For example, working with lots of the boys last year in particular, as I was looking after the whole strength and conditioning program, I'm reluctant to overload the boys because especially the tall gangly ones, you put a big load on their back, you damage their connective tissue and vertebrae and so on, or their knees or their ankles, and they get all these growth plate issues. And so again, rugby is a really brutal sport. And as is cricket, you see these cricketers. I see the young latest fast bowlers come back from back surgery, and it's all about overuse. And I mean, swimmers get it, shoulder issues, and so if you go too much too hard too early, you damage the growth plates and so on. Even mature athletes can get bad injuries from overuse. The great Mahi Drysdale, another rower, back surgeries. Rowers, bad form, overloading and repetitive. You get the body's designed to work, but not repetitive, same all the time.
And do you find from those injuries there that occur from overloading when they're younger, do you find when you've got to reteach their technique and reteach them how to do things, do you find that that's easy for that athlete to pick up, or do you find there that it takes a lot of adjusting before they're back to that high performance level again?
It depends a lot on the athlete. So some of them are good learners. And I think of a girl I trained, Jane Mitchell. Her name was a long jumper. She's now Jane Kiley. And she was a good example of a girl. She was a New Zealand pentathlete, 5 events in those days. Now we do heptathlon, yeah. And so she played netball and basketball at school. She was New Zealand junior heptathlon champion. So she moved to the Bay of Plenty to go to Otamoto College, and I was at Te Puke High School, and she come across to Te Puke and train. And so she was still doing like a multitude of things, but then of sports rather. Then she finished school and decided, well, I want to do athletics. So the other sports had helped her. But I said, well, Jane, you've got to start doing strength work. I'll never forget. She said, oh, Keith, I don't like doing the strength work. Why is that? My jeans don't fit me anymore because her legs were getting big. I said, well, so I went away to a world championship and I took videos of the best women in the world. And people thought I was perving because I was just filming their legs and their bums, and they're all well developed. I said, this is what the other women in the world have got. You got to compete against at the world class. You got to look like that. You can't be. She wasn't out of shape, but she wasn't. Bulky enough, wasn't strong enough, explosive enough. So, but the thing was, she'd come from a varied background, and then she began to specialize, and then she went from doing pentathlon to long jump and hurdles. Then she dropped hurdles because she couldn't get it was a nuisance getting hurdles out. But then she moved to Auckland, changed coaches, and she ruptured her Achilles. So then the coach thought, well, I'll teach her to jump off her other leg. So he taught her to jump off her other leg.
Yep.
And she was already New Zealand record holder champion, and I think she improved on her jumping off her other foot. Then she went to triple jump, which uses both. So she built up the strength and resistance to do both. So, there's a story within a story there about development and about the right time. So back in the day with the communist countries, they had a formula of development. Now we know they cheated with drugs and so on, but they developed their athletes from a generic background based around Olympic sports of swimming, athletics, and gymnastics. And then added into that ball game. So it was volleyball, handball, soccer, those sort of things. And that was the basis of their physical education and their elite sports programs. And then they would begin to whittle them down. So by the time you get to, say, 11 or 12, now we're going to put you in towards gymnastics, or you're not suitable, James, for gymnastics, but you'll be good at shot putting and basketball or whatever. So then you'll narrow it down. And then as an athlete, you'll be doing various events. Now we'll narrow it down. Now you're 15, and now you're 18, and now you're a javelin thrower. But you've come through all these other sports, and sort of pyramid of events. And I like that approach. It's a holistic approach. So when people want to specialize, with my 5-year-old kid's going to be an All Black, it ain't going to last.
Yeah.
You know, the kid will get burnt out, he'll lose interest and so on. So, yeah, but let them play whatever. And if you want rugby, let them play football, let them play hockey. Eventually, if let the kid choose, and then he'll devote himself. And I'll tell you, with the tenor later, with Let's, we talked about, he got himself up every day. Mum, we've got to go. Mum, it's time to get up. You know, he didn't have to be woken up, and he was self-driven. And I worked with I knew Paul Kingsman and Anthony Moss very well, both Olympic bronze medalists in swimming. And they had same thing. You know, every day they would wake the parents up, we've got to go to swimming, we've got to go to swimming. You know, they were devoted, they were dedicated, they were driven. They had the wherewithal, you know. Paul had a little notepad under his paper, piece of paper rather, about yay big, under his pillow from the age of 11 to win the Olympic medal. He didn't say what colour. And every morning he'd get up and it was a piece of paper in a plastic bag. And he'd look at that and he'd come home from swimming crying, his hair falling out, vomiting in the pool. But every night he'd look at that piece of paper. That was the reason why he did it. And he tells a story when he's in the pool one day swimming. And he was so stressed, he's vomited in his lane, and everyone leaves. It's a good way to clear the lane. He said, he just have a spew in the pool, and he keeps on training, you know. And he got his gold medal, his bronze medal rather, at the '88 Olympics.
Wow! Oh, that's a really good segue. Sorry, you go.
And both of them won by 4/100ths of a second. So how far is that? Is that far? Width for a piece of paper.
Wow.
So any movement you make. So if he didn't extend his little finger to touch the pad, he wouldn't have got the medal at the end of all that 200-meter race. So technique is important. Muscular endurance is important.
That's a really good segue into my next question, because, you know, doing some research, I can see that elite athletes have a combination of physical ability, technical skill, and mental strength. And it's going to be a testing question for you. Is there any one of those, and maybe you've just alluded to it with what you've talked about with that story, is there any one of those three factors that is more important than the others?
I would think the mental aspect, you know, is the most important. You know, if you're not driven, if you're not prepared to devote yourself, then, you know, there's a little saying, people say, with going back to New Zealand Sevens, what's the formula for success? I said 2 things: discipline, hard work, end of story. Titch would add, and teamwork as a coach. So discipline, hard work, that's it. So, you know, you've got to be driven. You've got to be, you know, tough with yourself. You've got to be able to get up and do what you have to do. And I've just written a thing about discipline for the Boys High, and it says, you know, that the difference between a good athlete and another bad athlete is that some days, if you're looking for excuses, you're not going to succeed as well as a person that looks for solutions. So, you know, I don't feel like it today. You know, if I'm not driven, you know, I know I'll miss today. I can't. And there's probably as many of those I remember as I do the other ones who've come out the other end. And the worst thing for me is, I won't be saying right. So, you know, there's James has pointed out hard work beats talent, and when talent doesn't work, So, you know, there's so many athletes. You know, I say also you've got to get rid of the but. I said, what do you mean the but? Because I'm looking at one boy years ago, and he was a bit fat. I said, no, I'm not talking about his backside. I'm saying he's a good player, but he's lazy, he's undisciplined, he's whatever. So you've got to replace the but with an and. He's a good player, and he's disciplined, he's hardworking, he's reliable, he's consistent, he's open to learning. And there's a lot of boys, you know, who have their own egos or whatever. They don't have that edge. They don't have that little factor where they, you know, want to be world's best. there's a few, and they stand out. They really do stand out. And regardless if they never become an All Black or never make an international team, they're the ones, that you really admire a lot. And I remember when I first came to Bad Plenty, we had a wide squad of about 60 players. And some guys were never going to make Bad Plenty, but they locked into what I was prescribing for them in their training. And I remember these two boys working together, young men working together in the gym, saying, even if we never make the Bad Plenty team, we're going to be better athletes. Understood, you see? He had a savvy. They understood it. And neither of them made it, but they enjoyed their club rugby. They enjoyed being fitter. And I see them now. Oh, Keith, remember the training, bro? Fittest in my life. And, now I'm working with Erona, 35 years old, fittest in my life. And, it gives me great joy to be able to do that, and then the guy I used to train when I played in rugby up in Northland with Kitty. And I met him years ago. Oh, Keith, man, it was the fittest in my life, when I was working with you. And I used to run with the boys then as well. But again, I brought a whole new perspective to training in rugby. Otherwise, just spin it out the wing, put it down. And, we've got to do other things, man. We've got to do speed. We've got to do conditioning work. And wow. And I mean, there was an All Black, Hamish McDonald, going back in the day when there was no lifting. I could out-jump Hamish McDonald. And back in the day when wingers used to throw the ball in, I'm not skyding, I'm just a principle, yeah? So wingers used to throw the ball in. And when it wasn't my turn, I'd go and jump, do something. And he'd go, go away, you're embarrassing me. Get out of here. And we had another guy in Northland, Mahi Maihanga, his name was. He was 6'8" or 9", but he couldn't jump. Get his feet that far off the ground. And I could out-jump him. It was easy to out-jump him. At least Hamish could get off the ground a bit.
Yep.
But I said to Hamish, bro, I can teach you, develop your vertical jump. No. I'm an All Black. But he was the second All Black to Andy Hayden and Paul Whiting. He was a third stringer. But he was in the team. He had the jersey, he had the bag. He's happy. Yeah. So I love the guy, but he didn't have that drive to be the best. He was happy to be an All Black. And often I've been with athletes in teams, they're happy to make the team because they got the gear. I got the bag, I got the gear, I got the trip. That's what they want to do. Just get on the bus, get on the plane, and happy days. Don't care about the result.
Yeah, being great takes a lot of discipline, doesn't it?
And it's like, the great Richie McCaw. I mean, he said, I didn't want to just be an All Black. I wanted to be a great All Black. And so, he said about doing what was required from a very young age. Same with Dan Carter and all these legends in sport you hear about. Very few of them just fall out of the sky on day one, and I've arrived and I'm great, I'm this, that, and the other. There's a lot of guys who've got the talent but don't apply themselves, and that is the thing that disappoints me the most. Is those people who just like, wow, if only, and you get rid of the buts and the excuses, and you become an end kind of player. And you turn up the training, and you do extras, and you have your notebook, and you'll do that sort of additional work these days, the analysis and all that sort of stuff they have to do. It's your job now, for a lot of people. But even if you're not, I say to school boys or whoever, being a professional doesn't mean you get paid. Having a professional attitude is about doing what you have to do to be the best you can be.
You've had an illustrious career across multiple sporting codes. Proudest moment?
I've got 3.
Oh, wow.
Can I have 3?
You can have 3. You deserve 3. Yeah, you could have 50 if we had more time.
I'm looking at the first one is the 1998 Commonwealth Games gold medal for New Zealand Sevens. First Sevens competition. I planned the whole program, and the New Zealand Rugby adhered to everything apart from one camp. They said, no, we can't afford the camp, but we ended up getting more time. So the whole preparation period, it was one of those sort of perfect plans that worked for months and out. And we had peak performance on the day, and it was phenomenal. So that would be the first one. The next one came in 2004, was BOP, Ranfurly Shield. You got it. And, that year I was supposed to go to the Olympic Games in 2004. And I was supposed to go to the games in Athens. But my wife was sick and I couldn't go. She was unable for me to leave her. And I remember coming home from Auckland with the shield in my hands on the bus. And I said to the boys, this is my Olympic Games. This is more meaningful, more important to me than the Olympic Games. And I brought my photo again to show you. Shall I hold it up now again? This here. This is a very, very meaningful thing to me. Thank you so much. And then the following year, and then the other one was New Zealand Sevens again, Rugby World Cup win in Argentina. And, funny thing was with the Sevens, it took us 3 years to win our home tournament in Wellington.
Yep.
We got beaten by Fiji the first year. We lost in the semi or quarterfinal to Samoa the second year. And then we beat Fiji again in the final. But the interesting thing is, this is me, my competitive edge. In that first year in Wellington, it was a dream come true for me to go to this new stadium. I just finished with the Hurricanes in the old athletic park. And I remember flying out of Wellington, looking down on the stadium thinking, I'd love to be in there one day. And a year later, I was in there with the Sevens. But we lost to Fiji in the final by a controversial decision, which I will never forget. Jonah was just allowed to try. They got a forward part. Anyway, so we're lining up to get the silver mug that nobody wants. And so I called the boys and I said, boys, next week, because we had to play Fiji next week. Next week, we're going to spoil their party. So we had to go to Fiji over there. Well, we beat Fiji in Fiji. That was the worst thing possible for a Fijian, is to lose at home. We thought it was tough. Maybe you should try to be Fijian and lose at home. So our boys come home. Now we get it, Keith. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
That's just amazing.
And then the World Cup in Mar del Plata was good because, again, we were well prepared, but we didn't have all the resources we needed. And the most probably disappointing was the following year, 2005, following World Cup rather, in Hong Kong, when we played Fiji in the final. We didn't have the best team. We weren't allowed to bring our Super Rugby boys in. We had 2 critical injuries, and Fiji did everything right. Fiji copied our model from before, and they did everything right, and then they were just too good for us on the day. And Waisali Sarevi said, well, today's our day. And we used to have these battles, it's your day today, bro, Commonwealth Games, your day today in Mar del Plata, and it was their day in Hong Kong. Good on you. And then I won't say what Rushy said about the people in the stands from the administration. He just said, I hope they can feel our pain. Rushy was there as a technical advisor in 2005, and he looks up at these administration people who are there for New Zealand Rugby. He said, I won't use the language you used, I hope they can feel our pain, because we knew we were on a hiding to nothing because we didn't have the best players and we hadn't had the full preparation.
Yeah.
So that was one of my but the three majors, great. And then, but there have been so many other joyful moments, with teams, and like, I guess the next one would be Lutulu Boys High School winning the Super 8 title over at Hamilton Boys year before last, when they won the Super 8 and took the undefeated home title of Boys High for 3 seasons or whatever it was. Yeah, that was one of the most exciting games of rugby in my life. That was phenomenal. 15. Yeah, to be able to
Wow. That's amazing. I think we'll have to do another one of these where we get you back just to hear the stories.
Yeah.
We've talked about training this time.
Yeah. We'd love, if you'd love to come back and do that, Keith, we'd love to have you, mate.
By all means, yeah. Well, I said if I didn't have this other appointment to go to, I'd still be here for hours.
I've been ticking over so many questions in my head during this interview. I'm like,
and I didn't even bring my notes. I just made this little short note here.
Yeah.
About the 1, 2, 3 years, so I didn't get it mixed up.
Yeah,
Exactly.
You're a wealth of knowledge, mate. Honestly, like, I'm like, being a sports science student myself. I am just like looking, just going, this is awesome. I wish I had you as a coach when I was younger, Craig? Like, that's what's going through my head. I'm like,
I'm envious that James is in Otaduwa and I'm here in Perth, that I can't just come and train with you as well. But I want to thank you for your work with the Bay team. That 2004 is one of, not that I played in the team, but in being my province is one of the, those proudest moments as a supporter. It's one of those moments where I still remember where I was when that game was being played. I was at the Mount Hot Pools with friends, and we were listening to it over the old speaker system when the Bay won. And, I'll always remember that.
For me, one of the most phenomenal things coming with that was when we got off the bus in Tauranga. Sorry, at the Red Fox. We got off the bus, the Red Fox Tavern. We stopped there. It was packed with Bay supporters, and we were mobbed getting off the bus. And we were just like, where? And then when we got off the bus in Tauranga, we were mobbed. But then the next best highlight for me was they had the next home game was against Waikato at the Bay Park Speedway.
Yeah.
And they had a parade in the stadium with open top vehicles.
I was at that game.
And I remember you were there.
Yep.
And I remember seeing it was Mark Basham and
a good
Casey
Rangidu man.
And Casey Wanoa. And those two boys, they were part of the old boys, and when they saw each other, they looked and they ran and they jumped and embraced and hugged each other and had tears of joy. And they hadn't even played.
Yeah.
That's what it meant to the Bay of Plenty people.
Mm.
That gives me
Yes.
tingles even now thinking about that. Gives me goosebumps.
Yes.
But the Bay was pretty special because we used to talk about we're a bunch of misfits. We're rejects. You guys are rejects. They got rejected from Otago and Wellington and every other province, and Bernie Upton comes, and guys, Kev Senior comes, and a bit like
Kevin
the
Senior,
Hurricanes.
yep.
I mean,
Yep.
the
We were
Hurricanes, we
totally-
were a bunch of no-names. Yeah, Ruas, I mean,
Yeah.
and they all come back from Rua wasn't wanted by Waikato or Auckland or North Harbour. Come to us, bro, and we'll do the shield with the and same in the Hurricanes. I mean, so many players came to the Hurricanes and became All Blacks, or we returned to All Black play. Glenn Osborne, Mark Cooksley, Andrew Blowers, and Ofisa Unu came down, and all these guys get checked out of here, and Davin Heaps from Southland, and it wasn't an All Black, but we had more out-of-town players than any other team, and yet we were cohesive and successful. And part of that, is our culture. It's creating team culture, and that's another whole issue about.
Yeah.
I mean, because everyone talks about culture these days. Well, everyone's got it.
Yeah.
Whether it's good or bad is the difference.
That's it. I think we'd have to save that one for another pod. I'm conscious of the time, and you have to get on your way. But thank you for your time, Keith. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thanks,
You have
Keith.
a
It was
great day.
amazing, mate.